Today is Tell a Fairy Tale Day. So I'm writing a fairy tale with your suggestions, and thank you to everyone with your suggestions. I'm busily trying to make something make sense of all of those wonderful suggestions of cucumber sandwiches and pineapples and finding gold at Mount Coolin and dragon eggs from the Bunya Mountains. Steve from Bundy suggested the Babadook, but I'm really struggling with that, incorporating that. If you've got a last minute suggestion, you can try to get it through 0487 993 222. Now, once upon a time, in a bustling radio station in breathtaking regional Queensland, there were stories shared of fairy tales over time, and then psychologist Dr. Jo Lukens, who possesses a remarkable gift, joined the conversation. Dr. Jo understands not just the mind, but the heart and the soul as well. She's here with me now to get mind-wise. I think I'm going silly with all of this fairy tale talk, Dr. Jo. We can talk about that another time.
We can. But can I say, just sitting across the desk as you're madly typing away, creating the story, the joy on your face, which I think is part of why we're talking about fairy tales, aren't we?
Exactly.
And what they mean for people.
Exactly. How do fairy tales influence our understanding and our learning?
I think it does it in lots of ways, and particularly through the characters. What we often see personified in many of the fairy tales is the notions of good and evil. And so we get characters who embody those virtues. They confront some sort of moral dilemma or some personal circumstance, whatever it might be, and then we get to see it through the lens of all of those. So whether it's the big bad wolf or it's the evil queen from Snow White, or the more virtuous characters, we just get to see those characteristics played out for us.
Yeah, you can think, what do I want to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And what do I resonate with? And then, which can be a little bit confronting at times, I think. So,
it can be. So what role do those archetypes play in fairy tales? How do they resonate with the human psyche?
Yeah, they do, because we get those characters, don't we? So we get the hero. We might get the wise old person, and often it's portrayed as a wise old man or a woman or the trickster. There's always a villain. Usually there's always a villain in our stories. And so they tap into those universal themes, and they really get us thinking about the stories that we see every day in our lives. So they make sense to us. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that they've been told and retold for centuries.
How do they contribute to the development of things like empathy and benefit our emotional intelligence?
Yeah, there's always a strong emotional linkage with any of the fairy tales. And if you think back to the ones that you particularly loved as a child, I can remember, gosh, I was thinking about this before coming in. I used to have a very old record player, and I used to listen to a fairy tale which was Peter and the Wolf. I don't know if you remember the story of Peter and the Wolf, but it had a musical soundtrack that went with it. And it would literally start, and I don't know why I would put myself through it. I would put it on and start crying immediately because I knew what was going to happen next. So I guess what we do is we see sadness in The Lion King, or we see fear and resilience in Hansel and Gretel. So we see those common human emotions played out through the fairy tales, and they help us to understand them and to make sense of them. They help us to identify them. So they really do help us with our emotional intelligence.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Jo. So can fairy tales serve as a bit of therapy, do you think?
Look, they can do, because I guess we resonate with the stories, don't we? And I guess every now and then we're reminded in our own lives that our lives are not always necessarily a fairy tale, because usually they end up going well for the protagonist. But humans learn through stories. We understand our lives through stories. So it makes sense that fairy tales potentially have a place to play with that. And we might draw on the characters or the stories or the themes. Cinderella went from rags to riches, and the ugly duckling found out that they really were beautiful anyway. There's lots of ways that we can look at the human condition through fairy tales.
Does it perpetuate stereotypes, or can we challenge some of those norms, do you think?
I think we can, and I think we have been doing that. That I think the fairy tales, maybe even, and I know for myself, the fairy tales that were told when I was a younger child now are getting retold in different ways, and sometimes you get pushback from people when they go, oh, it was
That's
fine
how
when
it
I
was.
was,
Yes.
when I was a child. And the other thing that you might have come across, and I remember them in storybooks for my own children, but also I've seen adult versions, is what's called the fractured fairy tales, which is where they spin the story. What if the big bad wolf was really just misunderstood? Or what if Aladdin hadn't rubbed the lantern and so forth? So it's looking at it from different perspectives. And I think fairy tales give us another opportunity to do that, because if you think about the fairy tales you loved and the fairy tales you didn't love, maybe it's something about what those stereotypes were.
Why do fairy tales tend to transcend culture and time?
they're an enduring popularity of them. And I guess because they often tap into common human themes, and often they'll go into love and fear and all the things that we know that are very normal as part of the human experience. And that constant retelling of stories. Plus there's the tradition that goes with it as well. So maybe you tell your children stories and the fairy stories because they were told to you. It's a part of what we think childhood is often about. It's interesting, isn't it, that we tend to stop with the fairy tales a little bit as we get older. But I think what's really happened with all the animated movies that we see now is that adults are hanging on to fairy tales for a lot longer as well.
Yeah, that nostalgia of it all. Okay, psychology expert Dr. Jo Lukens, thank you very much for your time. Now I'm going to read the fairy tale that we've written for this hour. Okay, here we go. In Pineapple Kingdom, Princess Penelope and Sir Cucumber set off to Mount Coolin to find hidden gold. En route, they met Platypus Prince Percy, seeking Bunya Mountain dragon eggs to save his kingdom. Together, they discovered the treasure guarded by a mischievous cane-toad Cyril. With quick thinking, they outwitted him, but not before Percy befriended Cyril with promises of adventure. Returning home, they feasted on cucumber sandwiches, their friendship stronger than gold, and as they shared tales, they knew that true riches lay in unity, kindness, and the bonds forged together on their magical journey. That's our fairy tale today for Tell a Fairy Tale Day. How did that go, Dr. Jo?
Oh, that was wonderful.
Thank you very much for that feedback. I appreciate it. Coming up, your next ABC News in just under 5 minutes' time.